With us now, Gareth Hughes and Ben Thomas for political commentary this morning. Good morning to you.
Kia ora morena.
Morena.
Gareth is the director of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Aotearoa, a former Green MP, no longer a member of any political party. Ben is a former National Government Press Secretary, a columnist and a director of public affairs firm Capital. Just for something different, because we keep talking about the economy. Let's talk about where things are at in education and specifically the teachers' strike last week. It's an interesting one, isn't it? If you can get the populace riled about someone striking because it affects them, it can work for you politically. I'm not sure that's where things are at just yet. What did you make of some of what happened? Judith Collins inflating the real pay of many, many teachers in one instance with an example that perhaps a few get. So what did you make of how it unfolded last week?
Look, I think the government came in hot. They really are trying to, win this one up front, for sort of almost kind of full bore assault.
It's a bit of a wedge you're trying to work.
Yeah, I think, because, I think they're trying to get in front of, but may just be playing into what is the traditional trajectory of these things, explained to me by my former colleague Matthew Hooton, who was a staffer for the Minister of Education in the 1990s.
All the way back to Lockwood Smith.
But look, these things do tend to follow a pattern, which is that when the teachers initially go on strike, there is a lot of anger at the teachers because of the inconvenience, because of the difficulty in figuring out what to do with your kids during that period. And as the strike goes on, the anger transfers to the government for not fixing it. So obviously the government is looking for a pretty decisive victory here. I think that's part of why, first of all, the Public Services Minister, Judith Collins, is here.
Well, the negotiations are happening with the
Public
Commissioner,
Service
right?
Commissioner is taking it directly. So essentially, I guess, cutting out that middleman of, we think this is probably a good deal. We'll take it to the people holding the pen and see what they think. Brian Roche is there holding the pen and just striking things out.
Is there a bigger issue at play? Are they trying to contain public sector pay increases? And can the teachers often set the bar to some extent? I don't know.
Oh, I mean, of course they are. Offering 1% a year for 3 years is, as they say, it's insulting. And the government is trying to pull it down the pressure. Ben's right. I mean, both sides had their arguments all ready to go for when the strike happened. We're seeing a pattern, however. Whenever there's a strike or collective bargaining, we see the government come out very hot, as Ben said, attacking the teachers. Judith Collins trying to make out that the average teacher with 10 years' experience is earning $140K a year. I mean, I think it's about 1 or 2%. Most teachers
DPs, I think.
Yeah,
some DPs might reach
in larger schools. And, a teacher...
And the old 12 weeks holiday. If you want to rack a teacher up, pull that one out like that.
But remember, they did exactly the same thing when it came to the doctors last year, making inaccurate statements about how well paid doctors were. And again, we see the same thing, kind of trying to bring a bit of envy, a bit of division to the debate.
And a couple of missteps, I think, in the portrayal. So obviously that pay figure, because I think that was a line that worked quite well with nurses, which was, I think, that the public didn't actually understand that nurses were quite as well paid as they are, and all of this is, of course, relative, and there's always arguments about whether it's enough. But for teachers, the pay level is well below that. I think also Collins, and I want to add, Judith Collins' sort of resurgence in this government as very competent, very senior minister, has been one of the sort of quiet sort of stories of this government. She's been excellent across a huge range of portfolios, but I think a misstep here, and she sort of said, these teachers sort of were taking it easy during COVID. I mean, I knew primary school teachers, scootering around Auckland in decile 1 areas, taking materials to the home,
dropping off laptops.
So is she trying? Are they trying to sort of put a wedge with parents, right? Or is that what the plan is?
Yeah, and I think Sanford's trying to be the good cop and Collins is the bad cop. But the problem is when you go out in the attack, you need to make sure you got your facts right.
I mean,
this argument that this strategy sort of worked with the police negotiations, where and it's a different model there, where it goes to the arbitrator, and the arbitrator accepted the police commissioner's argument. Well, the government says there's no more money, and so how are we going to pay for these claims if so?
What's interesting in this strategy, though, it's at a time where Erica Stanford, you talk about Judith Collins' resurgence, Erica Stanford has probably stamped herself as one of the more in terms of delivery, whatever you like or dislike about her policies, one of the more competent operators as a minister, that's for sure. Things are moving and moving fast in her portfolios, and with relatively little pushback from a sector that National often struggles with. So is she going to welcome this kind of stirring of the pot, or, as you say, is there an element of good cop, bad cop? That's Judith, but I'm on your side.
Well, she's got to have the confidence of the teachers. I mean, here she is announcing a massive fundamental overhaul of NCEA. This is going to be a huge thing to see if she can deliver
and the actual literacy and numeracy curricula as well.
That's right. So she's got a huge agenda of change. And I think when you look across the wider government, for a Conservative government, we're seeing huge reforms being bitten off, everything from, environmental standards to housing, to resource management, through to the basics of our education system.
But I think, well, look, and this, sorry to take it a bit broader in terms of the politics, but I think it is instructive to look at how these bigger reforms, these longer term reforms, on my reading at least, tend to be better received and better communicated than the government's central narrative about the economy, which is things are getting better. Can't you see things are getting better?
Stop with the doomsday stuff.
Where the government,
that does not ring well.
The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister really tied themselves to short-term gains and to this idea that people will be noticing the improvements already. Whereas you hear Chris Bishop talking about housing and RMA reform and infrastructure, he's saying it's a long-term thing. We are putting in place the building blocks. Erica Stanford saying, did an excellent interview on Q&A where she really laid out, this is about addressing the problems 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future that we can see coming now. And the public buys that, and I think Luke Malpass wrote a great piece in the Post on Saturday, saying that the old 3 bullet points repetition through the mainstream media doesn't work anymore for setting the narrative. You need to actually be straight up with the electorate. And you even saw Paul Goldsmith, I think, on RNZ when he was filling in on the panel last week, where he was confronted with the economic situation. He said, yeah, it's tough.
So
it's tough and we have to hunker down.
Is this a strategic error that's being made at the top, and is someone not listening then? Because there is a very busy agenda underway. It is by some being articulated. Again, some will love it or hate it, so be it. It is by some being articulated, whether it's Bishop or whether it's Erica Stanford. Are they making a mistake in continuing to make every single thing that happens, from card surcharges to anything else, about an economy that's still spluttering along, and no matter what your lectures are, everyone's feeling it?
Well, look, it wouldn't have been a mistake had those projections that they were working off a year and a half ago turned out to be right in terms of GDP growth.
Why did we ever think they would be?
There's a lot of motivated thinking when your political
is that what the word is for hope?
But they tied themselves to it, and so you even saw. To mention Goldsmith again, I thought a really interesting press release came out from the government, and it was about the new storage facility for Te Papa up in the heart. And it didn't lead with protecting our taonga, it led with this will create 4,000 jobs and we'll have shovels in the ground.
Okay.
Well, that's the problem for the government. They're trying to push this narrative. It's all about the economy, cost of living. But then you see them change the English or te reo words on top of the passport. And this is...
But then again, this is the three-headed coalition and everyone's priorities being kind of shunted out there. And what I think you're beginning to articulate is that the overall narrative ain't landing. And maybe it is time to think about focusing on some other things that are on people's minds. Be honest about what everyone's feeling and the length of this recession. Let's just call it what it is, whether it's 0.2% over or under. And focus on some other things that matter. But that brings me back to my question. Are people listening? I know we had this sort of the press, media loves this, the microphone faux pas moment with Nicola Willis last week. What a great image, literally stealing the PM's microphones. Some of this talk is,
Rachel Glusina with the scooper gear. What a callback to the old days.
Look, it's fun. No doubt ambitions are what they are and always will be in politicians, but it feels premature to be talking seriously about that. But is there a lack of listening and a lack of strategic reconsideration at the very top?
And I think that feeds into the idea that the Prime Minister is a little bit uncertain with his future. You know, it's that,
Oh, you're on board. Okay, carry on.
That only worked because there was a slight element of stickiness. You know, we see different people talking about it now, the historic underpolling in terms of the PM's favourability ratings, and a lack of communication. A chunk of the country is
Yeah, well, this
absolutely
communication
tuned
didn't
out.
go down too well last week, telling everyone to stop doomsdaying, you know.
And that's, I think, maybe the difference. Both Stanford and Bishop have control of their portfolios. They've actually got direct agency to actually do things. When you're talking about the economy, this is a 1,000 ton tanker, which is very slow to move around. They don't have the actual levers that they're pulling.
Do you know, this
to
is
turn it
another
around.
narrative that they could use. I was fascinated by the ASB's boss coming out and saying that Kiwis have put $17 billion extra into their mortgages as interest rates have come down.
Yeah.
They've overpaid that. Now, look, we are ones for running around and whacking everything on the mortgage, right, Kiwis? But people are actually paying down their debt. There's a theory also that in the primary sector, the same thing's happening with these very high returns they're getting at the moment. Now, that is actually at one level a good news story. Our public debt is one thing. Our private debt in this country is eye-watering. Now, couldn't you pivot in your argument and say, first, there's further relief to come as more people roll off their mortgages, and second, I know it's hard for business, but if people are paying down their debt, we'll take that as a long-term gain.
Yeah, that's right. And there is this, you know, I thought the extraordinary speech that Corandan referenced this morning, and I wrote about, after Simon Wilson, and I think Chris Keel in the Herald wrote about it. John Key's speech to that report on Auckland, where he basically came clean and said, the economy only works in New Zealand when house prices are going up and people are borrowing against it to spend. I mean, that's an extraordinary admission. During his whole time as Prime Minister, of course, his line was, we're actually making housing more affordable by keeping interest rates down with good...
It doubled under the previous Labour government.
That's right, but that was the line, right? And that was because, you know, you wanted this cognitive dissonance. He actually said in his speech, you know, well, when boomers are having rising house prices and their properties are more expensive, and they hear that this is making them harder for they tell pollsters that it's going to be, they're worried about their kids buying a house, and Key said there's a polite term, the technical term for that, he said, is bull-s.
Okay.
And this is the cognitive dissonance that politicians, I think, allow to run when they say, you know, oh, we want sustainable growth in house prices. We want, you know, I mean, Bishop's the only honest one. He says,
well, let's pick up on that, because you want to talk about what happened this morning. Chris Bishop is the first politician I can remember of any hue, certainly from one of the two major parties, to say he wants house prices to come down.
I remember Materi Ture saying that once upon a time in 2016 or something, and absolutely pilloried for it.
Yeah. And Labour certainly never got sucked into saying it. He does say it, right? And again, this is a generational thing. Who are you speaking to in terms of voters? For a younger generation politician with a young family, he's the guy to do it, right? But what happened this morning on Morning Report you wanted to reference, Ben, in terms of the Prime Minister's interview?
So the Prime Minister, not in a serious or aggressive way, but sort of undercut it. So he demurred, I suppose you would say. He said, well, we don't want to see house prices come down on average. What we want to see is sustainable growth that is outpaced by wage inflation, wage growth. And he did say we want to get growth through productivity improvements, not just from housing and from immigration, which of course is the magic formula for governments going back at least 30 years. You know, I mean, I think I've said on this show before, you know, Bishop is, you know, an extremely courageous politician, because he actually says what is true, which is that we have to decouple the New Zealand economy from rising house prices, because all of these rising house prices are basically just running up the tab against future generations that you can get the money back from when you sell it to first home buyers.
Back to national strategy and whether it is time for a rethink.
Well, and it's clearly not working, and it comes to the economy. Paul Conway gave a speech with Reserve Bank chief economist at the time of the OCR cut, pointing out exactly what Ben's saying. For decades, this has been the prime drivers of growth, house prices and growing population through migration. That has worked in the past, but every decade, actually, the rate of growth is shrinking. So it's not a particularly successful strategy. And this is the problem for the government, is they've pinned all their hopes by pulling out a bunch of government spending. You get the Reserve Bank to drop the OCR. They're celebrating this 25 basis cut as a massive win for the government. Actually, it's a sign of the flailing
the
economy.
next two, the fact there's going to be two more, is certainly a sign of
And
economic unwellness. Yeah,
and two of the voters, were voting. Sorry, two of the Reserve Bank committee were voting for the bazooka cut option. But the government, we're looking at inflation in the September quarter up at around 3%, which is the high limits of the current bounds. House prices 20 to 30% below their historic highs. People aren't spending. There's also some figures from Bernard Hickey showing that household savings have grown $26 billion in bank accounts over the last 18 months. So people aren't spending.
I know, but again, that could be reframed. It's actually a positive thing long term for the economic stability of the country if we bring down private
But they
debt.
pinned all the hopes on particularly landlords and homeowners hitting the credit cards.
Labor, just to touch on this, Labor and the Greens, we haven't talked about them for a while. We're going to talk about the fact Labor's had two members' bills get right through the process shortly in a moment, but they do seem to be playing the small target approach. Not so much the Greens, they just struggle to get the same headlines, right? They've come out with a very full economic policy. The argument is some of what's in their policy would terrify Labor and potential swing voters. So let's talk about the left and how they are playing things. Gareth, is it right for Labor to remain a small target right now in the context that we're talking about?
Well, it's working, and it isn't working. It's working in the sense that they're polling, roughly comparative to National, it's 50-50 odds for changing the government. In terms of a strategy, it's working for them. But when the heat of the election comes on, when you're actually launching policies, when you've got big campaigns and the attacks start getting made, that's when, it'll be a fruit whether or not it's been a good strategy. At the moment, whatever the issue, Labor doesn't have a response except to say, well, we'll develop a policy at some point in the future. You're right, the Greens are coming out with big substantive policy. I think they've buried the horror first half of the term and actually getting down to doing some good substantive work.
How do you read it with Labor, though? In some ways, are you best to get people kind of attenuated, used to policies that might be challenging early rather than having show me the money moments during an election campaign?
Well, look, just on the big one, I think, which is the capital gains.
That's going to come out this year,
It's going to come out this year, I
think
assume.
they've said by the end of the year.
And it's probably the best time to launch one, right? At a time when nobody's getting any capital gains. We're, in the past when they've launched this during
Glass
elections,
half
there's
full,
been...
here we are.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing is, capital gain, the sort of, capital gains, it's a bit of a red herring these days. I mean, Labor have already spent it 20 times over in the last 10 years in terms of this. So there's no windfall coming because we are going to be increasingly living in a world of normal returns on assets. But at the same time, if you're going to launch one, no better time than now when previously it's been at a time of 10% annual gains in home prices where people see it as this big tax that's coming down the line for them. Here, they'll probably see it as a strange curiosity. It'll be much harder to, I think, rack up fear about it, especially if there are some sort of trade-offs or concessions on it.
And that's the risk for them, is they're considering a capital gains tax or a wealth tax over the last 10, 15 years. I think the argument's being comprehensively won for a capital gains tax. Of course, the government's still going to scaremonger about it and try and use it as an attack. But the polls show a majority of people support a capital gains tax. They understand that if you win, it's fair to have that income tax. But if they go with a wealth tax, this is something that doesn't have that level of public understanding. The realised versus unrealised nature of it is a risk. So it'll be interesting where they land. Okay.
A couple of other things to talk about. I mentioned that Labor's got two members' bills through the process. That should always be welcome. I think it was Sue Bradford had the record, didn't she, for the number of members' bills she got through during her term. One of Parliament's hardest working MPs, by the way. I'm not surprised she got the numbers up for three of those. As well as a bit of luck. Maybe should have bought the lotto ticket. What else have we got? We mentioned Judith Collins. It's interesting, 1 minute the teachers are being paid X, and the next minute, I'm spending $2 billion on new planes and choppers. I think this appears to be accepted. Even Labor was saying, certainly, I think Carmel Sepuloni saying we've got to do this, yeah?
Oh, well, the old Air Force planes were such an embarrassment. I think everyone understands it's right and good that the country has planes that actually work reliably. And these Seahawk helicopters that we're buying, it's what Australia has. They've got about 3 dozen of them. Makes sense to have the interoperability.
Interesting argument as to whether it might resolve the trade imbalance and get rid of the tariff, but there we go. I'm not sure if that's a real-time updating dashboard that's getting held up. We did talk this morning, though, about local water done well. Now, this is getting close. And again, who ever thought in history we'd be talking about pipes as much as we have been lately? We're not talking about pipes. We're talking about massive increases on people's rates bills. And September...
Well, no, not their rates bills, because it's
Well, their
ring-fenced.
water rates bills on top of their rates bills, right?
Yes.
Whatever you want to call it, their local government spend is going up and up. How do you think it's tracking? We had some critiquing from this morning saying they'd have been better off, whatever you made of Three Waters, and particularly some of its more controversial elements, it was a better model, basically, than what's happening here. And the government has got a bunch of smaller players in some instances saying we're going to go it alone.
Well, Simon Watts, before the election, the architect of the water work done well policy, was saying that prices were going to be lower under their model. Now he can't
won't
say
say
that,
that
and
now.
he won't say that.
I don't know why he ever said that. When is anything ever cheaper than what went before it?
No, the argument was always lower than under Three Waters. Nobody was ever suggesting that water prices were going to go down.
No. But my point is, when is anything that's delayed by several years cheaper than the thing that wasn't? You know.
Well, yeah. Look, there's arguments either. Look, I was doing work for a pro Three Waters organisation, and I didn't have the sort of, and I certainly don't see that a lot of the objections to it were not well founded. But the fundamental characteristics of it, which is ring fencing, which is having dedicated plans, having supervision of these entities, and having them sort of operationally separate from the councils, that's in place in local water done well.
But Brian Cadogan's point was, under the previous plan, the entire South Island was going to be buying as one. Now there's going to be 17 different entities buying services.
And that's the rod National made for its back in opposition by so heavily politicising this, running on the local, ownership of the water assets, that we're now maybe going to see 40 different separate water entities. In the South Island, I think it's 17 or maybe 19 councils are going alone. When you had these bigger organisations, you had the economies of scale, you could actually borrow separate to the council books. If we've got councils running these as in-house entities, many of our councils are already at their debt limits at the moment. So the only way they're going to be able to square that circle is to increase rates.
By cutting off and by creating CCOs, that does help with the balance sheet issues in terms of the borrowing. Look, the issue, the real issue is that some of these organisations, or some of these councils, they're just too small. They're too spread out. They have too few ratepayers. Of course, and Cadogan is the mayor of one of so.
But he signed up, but they had another neighbouring council pull out.
No, for sure, and and look, you see it in the north as well. Everyone says, well, of course, there's going to have to be amalgamations, and Auckland says, but not us, and Whangarei says, not us, and then you've just got the Far North District Council sort of left, and I think they want to go it alone as well. But look. Ultimately, I think, local water done well, it was a political solution to this issue, which was, okay, you say you can do it. Here you go. Here are the ground rules to make sure that you are spending enough, that you're investing. Let's see how you go.
Well, the next question is, are they prepared to force them to do things they don't want to do?
I mean, eventually the forcing will come through the Commerce Commission and through the supervision.
So it's next term's problem and the term after that.
I think it becomes next term's problem, yeah.
Thank you both. Always so appreciate your time. We're all there's a bit of it about at the moment, isn't there, guys? Thanks for coming in today. And really appreciate your time. That's Gareth Hughes and Ben Thomas.